We're live, so you can start.
Okay, sounds good. Hey everyone, this is Gloria from DoraHacks. For those who don't know us, we're the world's largest multi-chain hackathon provider and developer incentive platform. I'm very thrilled to be hosting the very first workshop for the FraxBuild hackathon today. It's actually the first ever official hackathon of the Frax ecosystem that's hosted by Frax Finance, Flywheel DeFi, and DoraHacks. So the goal of this hackathon is to bring further engagement with the developer community like you guys to build some innovative products and solutions that enhance the overall Frax ecosystem of stablecoins. The speaker for today's workshop is going to be led by Sam. He will be leading the technical workshop today. I know we have a lot of ground to cover. So without further ado, let's welcome Sam. And remember to ping questions in the chat, and I can relay that over to Sam. And yeah, let's dive straight into the workshop.
Hey, thanks, Gloria. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Awesome, great. Welcome, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about LSDFi and Frax v2 for the first technical workshop. I wanted to first say, at the end of it, hopefully we can take a lot of questions. It is a workshop, but then let's get right down to it. I don't think it'll take the full hour or anything, so there should be a lot of time. Thank you. Cool. So first of all, I like to spell LSDFi rather than LSDFi because the way that I like to think about this stuff is that it's basically DeFi with LSDs built in. And so today's talk is basically about what LSD protocols actually are, how we think about them at Frax Finance, and how Frax v2 will work. This is the first time we're publicly actually going to show the entire workings and structure of Frax v2. So the main points of this talk basically is that our essential, worldview, at least mine when designing this system and the way that I look at all LSD protocols, is they're single peer-to-pool lending markets. And so what that means, obviously, for people that have used Compound, Aave, or Frax Lend, and these kinds of things, is they are just a single pair where people lend something on one side and borrowers borrow something on the other. The LSD tokens themselves are essentially interest-bearing stablecoins. The stablecoin is pegged to ETH, obviously, rather than dollars. And the way that you can think of something like Steth is that it's like AUSDC. AUSDC is Aave's lending token, right? When you're a lender and you put in USDC, you get AUSDC, and that rebases for the interest rate that borrowers of USDC on Aave are paying. And for example, there's other lending markets like Compound that don't do rebases. They do something like CDI or CUSDC like Compound, where the price of the receipt token actually increases. Those are like SFrax ETH and REITH. And one of the main claims today that I'm trying to make is that all LSD APRs are basically capped by the collateral costs, and all other things held constant. So when you basically remove all extra incentives, all validator performances are basically equalized. You assume the same fees or zero fees. The APR that lending receipt token, whether you want to call it an LSD or whatever, that is capped by what type of underlying loan the LSD protocol is actually making. And for example, rather than trying to analyze an LSD protocol like Rocket Pool and looking at the different names of things like mini pool contracts and this or that and things like that, if you just find what the actual underlying LTV of the loan is, then you will know what the cap of that LSD protocol's returns necessarily are if you remove any of the extra incentives. And so that's kind of the intro, what we need to know about LSDFi kind of protocols and how we think about them at Frax Finance. And so obviously on the right is CoinGecko's ranking of LSDs by market cap. They list Frax Ether and staked Frax Ether. That's the interest-bearing token at number 4. But I think Frax Ether is basically the one at number 3, and that's the main token. So here is Frax ETH v2 in all its glory. So this is actually the finalized spec of how it will work and how it functions. And at the center of all of it is essentially a lending pool right in the middle. And the most important part is how lenders and borrowers actually function in the open market. So essentially, how Frax ETH v2 works is it is a lending market where users come, mint Frax ETH, and the ETH they use goes into this central lending pool here. And this central lending pool is just the same thing as you might have seen in FraxLend, in Aave, in all of these things. And it uses a interest rate calculator with a utilization rate. So it's basically the interest rate is a function of market borrowers. And at the bottom right, you can see there's validator pool contracts. So if you want to run a validator, anyone can come, register their validator public key, and the set withdrawal addresses of the protocol are set properly. And you can actually initiate a loan to borrow a validator. Now that's pretty important because you're not just borrowing 32 ETH and taking the ETH and basically running away with it, being able to do whatever you want. You're borrowing actually a validator, or the right to run a validator. And so that's a different asset than 32 ETH exactly, right? Because you can only do certain constrained things with running a validator. And when you come as a borrower, you take some of the ETH and the validators are spin up for you. The right side of this lending market is basically the Curve AMO, which basically is the protocol controlled smart contract that manages the Curve pool. And so any ETH left over from lenders, right, that actually doesn't sit idle in the lending pool like ETH or stablecoins might in Compound or Aave. What actually happens is it gets flown to the Curve AMO contract, which then balances the protocol controlled liquidity in Curve and earns some yield there. Now, what's interesting about that is that, if Frax ETH didn't issue its own stablecoin, it wouldn't be able to actually have a Curve AMO, because imagine what Aave or Compound or something basically doesn't do, right? They don't siphon the USDC to Curve into like 3CRV or something, because lenders need to be able to get exactly USDC out, right? They can't actually put it in any kind of other Curve pool. Now, because the Curve pool is ETH and Frax ETH, one is collateral and one is the actual liability of the protocol, all idle ETH that lenders put in can actually be basically market made in the Curve pool with the Curve AMO, right? Because there's absolutely no way that there can actually be any kind of loss. If someone buys Frax ETH from the Curve pool, they have to place 1 ETH in there. If someone sells Frax ETH for ETH, removing an ETH out of the Curve pool, the protocol has 1 less Frax ETH liability. So this is actually pretty unique in terms of tokenomics. A lot of people don't get it at first. The fact that putting it in the Curve pool is risk-free from an economics perspective. Obviously, there's smart contract risk, right, in Curve and the Curve AMO and stuff, but there's no way to actually for the protocol to lose money. And so the interest rate is calculated as the ETH in the Curve AMO and the lending pool itself. And so you get the entire utilization rate of these two contracts, and that is a market set interest rate. Lastly, at the bottom is the Beacon Oracle. And this is actually important because, as a lot of people know, right now in Ethereum, there's no way to actually read Beacon chain state using smart contracts. You can't actually write a Solidity function that reads Beacon chain state. So you actually need some kind of oracle to update performance of the validators or how much ETH has been earned and these kinds of things. So the most important thing is how the actual oracle is designed and how it works, what the trust assumptions there are. And this is something for all LSD protocols, including Rocket Pool, including Lido, including Frax v2. And the cool thing is it's this beacon oracle actually uses ZK proofs to prove that the actual computation is valid, and it runs with FraxGov, which is our recently released governance module that is entirely on-chain. So anyone can monitor, propose, anyone that's a VFXS staker can initiate changes to who runs the actual oracle or these kinds of things. And if it's voted on by token holders on-chain, then it is actually put on-chain and updated. There's no snapshot vote. There's no off-chain things. There's no admin address with like a EOA as the person that sets the MSIG, whatever, any of this stuff. It is fully on-chain and as trust minimized as possible in terms of an oracle. And the actual computations are proofs of computation of valid beacon chain states, given that you trust a root hash. So that is essentially the entire workings of Frax ETH v2. Now, why is it very important and why is this actually unique and how come it took us a long time to actually make? The reason for it is that Frax ETH v2 brings a bunch of new innovations. Firstly, it's the world's first market set interest rate for borrowing validators. That's actually very important, right? Because after Frax ETH v2 is live, there will always be an open market interest rate for the cost of borrowing a validator. You will actually be able to see how much it costs to borrow a validator in real time. And that's very, very important. And the borrow rates basically propagate through global LSD markets. If you think about it, if you're trying to run a node, either yourself or you're a professional company that runs nodes, maybe you're a Lido partner that's one of the 29 or so kind of institutional groups that run the Lido validators, you can actually check how expensive it is for you to run even more validators by borrowing them in Frax ETH v2. And that borrow rate essentially will, in our opinion, be kind of the Fed rate, so to speak, of borrowing validators. And the other thing is that doing it in an open market way like this, rather than kind of setting constants or setting commission rates or setting fees or things like that, encourages the most competent and performant node operators, because the rates are set by utilization rate, right? So the rates are set by the market. And so naturally, the most performant and the most sophisticated and the most competent people and organizations will be running Frax ETH v2 validators. And why that's important is if you actually look at the all-time validator performance rankings, this is on rated.network. It's an independent third party. It's not affiliated by or like even related to Frax in any way. If you actually look at the all-time rankings, Frax's validators are the most performant out of everyone. If you look at Frax, it has a 97.28 effectiveness rating. And other than, I think, Ledger Live and maybe Whale 0x5D, we have also the largest backwards looking APR. We're basically the most profitable. Now, the caveat here is Frax ETH v1 is the validators are run by the core team, right? And so that is essentially the Frax core team running the validators. But what's important here is that we still perform vastly better than pretty much every single other both protocol as well as centralized entity. And we wanted to make sure that this was the case in our design for Frax ETH v2, so that it isn't just encouraging anyone that basically does not, fully understand performance, and then basically, that low kind of profitability then translates to lower sFrax ETH APR. This is essentially the most efficient way to get competent and performant node operators to participate in a decentralized way. And I think that it's actually kind of telling, because there's a lot of people on Twitter that currently don't like the Frax ETH V1 design, because they say it's centralized in terms of node operators. And there's just a lot of people that say, oh, these are just validators ran in Sam's basement or like people's basement or something. And I always laugh at that when I look at these rankings, because then that means that if that was true, your entire protocol's effectiveness is lower than validators ran in someone's basement. So obviously, the reality is that the current Frax ETH V1 validators are ran by very, very professional infrastructure managed by core team, mainly Alex and Justin. And it's so incredibly optimized. And as you can see, objectively performing better than anyone else, all time, basically. And we want to make sure that Frax ETH V2 is a fully permissionless and decentralized way to encourage that same level of performant competence. Lastly, so where does Frax ETH come in on all of this in terms of the design? We talked about loans. Well, Frax ETH is the stablecoin backed by these over-collateralized validator loans, right? It's basically the DAI of this new system. If you've used DAI, clearly I assume every single person listening to this has used either DAI or knows how it works. Imagine if DAI was just pegged to ETH, and imagine that when you did an over-collateralized loan, you were borrowing validators, and the DAI stablecoin was backed by the validator loan instead of just the over-collateralized other kind of asset. Cool. So the remaining part of the talk, I actually wanted to go over the other leading LSDs and talk about how they're all the same thing, but with slightly different marketing speak, essentially, right? And so here I have Rocket Pool, great protocol, very, very OG and Ethereum crypto centric. So one of the main things that I like to obviously highlight here is Rocket Pool does a lot of things like, calling things mini pools, stake your ETH on this contract and get RETH, and then stake this and then run a node and these kinds of things. If you peel away all of the layers here, right, what's really going on is essentially just the lending market. When someone comes up at the top right and deposits ETH, they get out the token called RETH. Again, that's basically like a compound C token. It's like CDAI, CETH, CUSDC, right? And they earn interest. They don't call the interest an interest rate. They call it the POS reward rate or LSD APR. It's the same thing, right? And the lenders are essentially the RETH holders, right? RETH is a lending receipt token. That's basically what it is, right? And the borrowers are the node operators. And the borrowers come and they obviously have to have an over-collateralized loan. Right now, Rocket Pool offers validators to be borrowed if you put up 8 ETH. Previously, it used to be 16, but with their Atlas upgrade, they essentially lowered the collateral requirement and increased the LTV of the loan, which is good. That means that borrowers need to pay less costs, essentially, right? Less collateral costs. And then they get to borrow notes, and then they pay interest to the RETH holders. Now, what's interesting is if you go to rocketpool.net, right, you actually can kind of see the two-sided lending market, right? Because there's stake ETH and there's stake plus run node, but they don't actually say anything like that, right? There's basically the node running side, the borrower, and then the lender. And so one kind of theme of this talk is I encourage people to look as they're building LSD-Fi stuff to actually analyze all LSD protocols and find the underlying LTV and loan structure. Next, this is Lido. And Lido is even simpler than Rocket Pool, obviously. Lido, you deposit ETH, right, at the top right, and you get stETH. stETH is the lending receipt token, and you get interest rate rebases. Instead of interest rate, they call it rebases. Everyone calls it something different. Underlying, it's all the same. And then the lending pool is basically the constellation of stETH, minting contracts and these kinds of things. But what's unique and different about Lido is that the borrowers are not you or me. They are Lido partners, right? The whitelisted, individuals and organizations. I believe there's 29 of them. Maybe there's more now, and they don't have to put up any collateral, right? They're whitelisted. Lido as a DAO or an organization, it knows their KYC information. They've signed legal documents. There's a physical off-chain relationship or legal entity and legal documents, right? And so essentially it's a credit-based loan. There is no over collateralization here. And that's why obviously borrowing validators is not permissionless on Lido, right? But the lending schematic is the same. The structure is identical. It's just who can actually be a borrower. And so obviously on Lido's front end, which I put on the right hand side, there's no data on how much you earn by running a node because you can't be a borrower, at least not yet. All right. And so some people that are following Lido's V2 or new updates, I think there is a push to do these kinds of LSD modules, which is essentially just a different way of saying designing different kinds of loans, right? Designing ways in which validators can be borrowed given certain conditions. So the parting thoughts on this kind of stuff is that if you're building DeFi LSD infrastructure, a DeFi LSD app, or even building your own LSD protocol, the thing you should really think about is what are the underlying crypto economics here? What loan are you actually designing? Because that actually is the cap of the LSD's APR. So one thing that people need to understand is decentralization and over collateralization has a cost, obviously. And so actually, if I go back here, if you look at the stake ETH side on the Rocket Pool dashboard, it says 3.94 APR, right? Rocket Pool's REIT consistently has the lowest APR of any LSD protocol. And that's not a knock on Rocket Pool. It's the most decentralized one in terms of node operators, but it is also consistently the lowest yielding interest for its lenders, for its REIT holders, right? And that's not by coincidence, right? That's because all the borrowers require putting up 8 ETH. It requires an over collateralized loan. And so it's more costly to actually keep the system going. And there's less interest returned to lenders, the REIT holders, right? And so that's why with stETH, for example, these are updated numbers, by the way. I took these last night. Right now, stETH is 4.7%, and it's obviously higher than REIT, and it's almost always been, as far as I'm aware. And Frax ETH has also always been higher than Lido's stETH because our validators are slightly higher performant, but also the unique to token structure. So if you actually go look at Frax ETH on FraxFacts, you'll actually see it's still higher than Lido's currently. So the last kind of thoughts here is when you look at these loans, obviously the collateral type is just fundamentally agnostic, whether you use ETH or Ripple or FXS. And there's been a lot of talk about Rocket Pool using Ripple. Some people like that, some people don't like that. The underlying economics are the exact same. You still have the same constraints. It's still an over collateralized loan. Obviously, the collateral quality is different. ETH is highly liquid. Everyone likes ETH, so they can put it up. It can get liquidated easier. If you get, for example, slashed when you borrow a validator, it might not be as easy to liquidate your Ripple or FXS as much as it is ETH. But fundamentally, there is actually no difference in terms of the cost of this lending market. It's a two-sided lending market. There's collateral and there is borrowers. And lastly, Frax ETH v2 is definitely very unique in the sense that it's the first fully programmable LSD marketplace for borrowing validators. It's completely programmable and agnostic in terms of what type of loans and what kind of collateral it can accept. Obviously, that's by VFXS holders and governance. It obviously will be mainly for starter with ETH collateral, but the idea behind this is a fully programmable and fully agnostic lending market to actually create a marketplace for lenders of ETH and borrowers of validators. And that actually has not been made before. That's Frax ETH v2's promise. That's our vision for Frax ETH v2. And it is, in our opinion, the most decentralized way to actually build a liquid staking derivative and hopefully the backbone of LSDFi. So thank you guys very much. As always, you can connect with me. Everyone knows I'm on Telegram all day, every day. And obviously follow Frax. And thank you for DoraHacks for putting this on. And I can take questions and do the remaining end of the workshop. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sam, for shedding more light into Frax ETH v2 and also DeFi LSD. I know that we do have a couple of questions that were pinged throughout the session. Yeah, so this is like the first one. I know it's on the screen here, but does Frax ETH yield sustainable as REITH as consistently for the long term?
It should be always higher than REITH, given everything constant in terms of validator performance. So the whole point of this, like I was saying, is that basically, as long as our collateral requirements are the same or less than Rocket Pool, and our interest rates are market set, there should never be a time where SFrax ETH yields less than REITH. Obviously, those are assumptions. I obviously, predicated this on given those kinds of things. But for example, as shown in the talk, our validators are much more performant than Rocket Pools right now. And the design that we have in terms of a market set rate should encourage our performance to be, in terms of validators, significantly better than everyone else, given that it encourages competence and performance, right? So if you think about it, right, let's say that you are 0x whale 5D, like I was showing in the in this slide. If we go back here, right, whale 0x 5D has the highest backwards APR of any validator, followed closely by Frax, but whoever he, she, they, it, or whale is, they know how to really run a profitable validator operation, that's for sure, in terms of MEV, in terms of just making sure that they're producing the best blocks and attestations and stuff, right? And so Whale 0x5D should want to borrow as much validators in Frax ETH v2, right, as they can to earn as much profit, and that should push up the utilization rate until the interest rate is high enough where other people that aren't as performant wouldn't pay that interest rate, right? If it's a high enough interest rate, you wouldn't pay that, right? Because you're not actually making money. But Whale 0x5D is, right? They're very, very performant, right? And they're the ones borrowing the validator. And he's the one, or he, she, they, it, is the one that's actually paying all of the SFrax ETH lenders, essentially, right? And the interest rate is very, very high. It's basically the highest bidder, right? And so does Frax ETH yield sustainably as REITH as consistently? The answer is no, it yields higher than REITH consistently. That's the whole point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. We do have another clarifying question as to why someone would want to borrow a Frax ETH validator with an over-collateralized loan, and if you can go over the borrowing a validator process again, including like the pros and cons of it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, to be clear, by over-collateralized loan, you only have to put up 2 to 8 ETH. Right now, we think that we can actually do less than 8 ETH based on our models and designs. Rocket Pool does 8 ETH. That's still technically an over-collateralized loan, right? Because Frax ETH is backed by 32 ETH in the validator plus, for example, 8 ETH, which is 40 ETH, right? For 32 Frax ETH that was minted, right, into the open market. So don't be confused by the word over collateralized. It doesn't mean someone can borrow a validator, but they need to put up 32 or more ETH. They only need to put up 2 to 8 ETH maximum. And it's the same way that Rocket Pool works, but it will be most likely actually even more efficient, both in terms of LTV as well as in terms of performance, right? Because the most competent node runners will be willing to actually borrow them and pay interest rates. So yeah.
Great, thanks for that. We do have one more question, whether FraxGov is going to have control over FraxBuild assets.
That's a good question outside of LSD5. But yeah, the answer is Frax Ferry V2 actually uses ZK proofs that actually make basically the movement of assets between different chains trustless, given that the root hash of the destination and the origination chain is on the actual network, right? And so the answer is yes, FraxGov will control the Frax Ferry assets, but it's even more trustless than that, because the movement between networks through the ferry will be ZK proofs, and we're actually working on that independently. So it's coming.
Great. Another question. Also, when game-changing BAMM?
Oh, the ban. Yeah, so this talk was about Frax V2, since everyone keeps talking about LSD Summer. But maybe the next talk should be about BAM, because it is the main part of Frax V3 and the new dollar peg stablecoin version that we're trying to launch. So more stuff about that will come. But right now, we're super excited about pushing out Frax V2.
Yeah, awesome. It looks like some of the spectators are jumping the gun here and excited already for the next workshop. But anyway, that is all our questions for today. Thank you, Sam, so much for running this workshop. Seems like there's a lot of positive feedback from the viewers. And for everyone who joined, thanks again for participating. I'm looking forward to seeing all the new projects leveraging and improving upon this programmable, innovative marketplace for loans and collaterals. We do have one more technical workshop. There are also additional office hours, so be sure to follow DoraHacks and Frax Finance for more updates on the upcoming events. But yeah, I hope everyone enjoys their weekend. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
See you guys.